Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's an honor, actually, and it's kind of impressive to see such a large audience. So many neuroscientists here in the audience. And I also like to especially thank Dana Baron for organizing and inviting me for this event. So who here out here thinks that at some point you might want to start a business or join a high-tech firm in a new area? Is anybody thinking that you might want to start a new business or be in high-tech at some point? Okay, so that's good. And you're already engaged in some very exciting interdisciplinary research in neuroscience, which is really at the cutting edge of where we're learning exciting new things about how people work and the brain works. So I think you're in a promising place. And so the question, I guess, is, have you already found your million-dollar idea? Now, a million-dollar idea, this is just not a regular idea. This is a really good idea, right? And of course, we all have lots of ideas all the time. In fact, actually, I don't know about you, but I actually walk around with a pen and paper all the time so that I can kind of jot down ideas when I get them so I don't forget them later. But the problem is you have this big collection of ideas and you have to figure out how to sort through them to find the really good ones. And when you find a really good one, the problem is going to be that you need to figure out how to take that and potentially turn it into a business. Now, when you find an idea, when you find your million-dollar idea, you're going to have to commit to this idea. This is going to be something that you are going to spend time and money on. You're going to commit, the amount of time you're going to commit to starting a new business could well be longer than your marriage. Okay, so this is going to be a long-term commitment. It's going to be something where you really have to love this idea. And if you don't love the idea, then you just cannot make this kind of commitment. And you're going to want to be passionate about this idea. This is an idea that's going to really motivate you because there's going to be ups and downs, and you're going to have to be able to survive the downs to get back to the ups. And if you don't love the idea, then it's going to be something that might not be something that you can actually really take through to completion. And it's important that it's not just you that loves this idea. You're going to have to convince a lot of other people to love this idea too. And so they're going to have to get passionate about it too. So if you want to, you're going to need to be able to recruit investors, employees, suppliers, strategic partners, and of course eventually customers to get them all on board if you want to turn your idea into something that's going to eventually be a business. So when I talk about this subject at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, I kind of break it down just to sort of 4 simple letters, and those are NAVC. So initially, NAVC just means you need to find a viable business concept. And of course, that sounds obvious enough, but the answer is what's viable is not so obvious. And so we're going to talk about sort of how do you start weeding through those ideas to figure out which ones might be viable business concepts that you could then potentially commit to and turn into a business and a new venture. That's also NAVC, as it turns out. And so there's really 4 questions that you need to start thinking about answering, really critical questions you need to answer if you want to be successful. Now, you might be thinking, Manish Tana, but it's not those 4 questions. Yeah, so the 4 questions are, what problem do you think you need to solve? Okay, so now you'd like it to be a big problem, because if it's a big problem, it's going to be important, it's going to be something that's important to the world, it's going to be important to you, and potentially very valuable. So you want to find kind of a big problem that you would like to commit to. The second question, and that we call that the need question. The second question is, how are you going to solve that problem? What are you going to do? Is it a new device, a new drug, a new web app, a new mobile app, a new process? How are you going to solve that problem? And you want something that's kind of achievable, right? So you want something that's within your skill set that you can actually achieve and you can bring together a team to complete. And so you want something where you can create an application. That's the second question. Now the third question is, how are you going to make any money doing this? Now, sometimes when I talk to scientists, they tell me, oh, I don't really need to be making any money. I really want to do this for the good of humanity. I am doing this because it's important for the world. And that's all laudable. But even if you would like to start a non-for-profit business that basically just kind of does your thing and there's no profits involved, you're still going to need to figure out how to get the resources to be able to maintain and run your business. So for example, I mean, if you have a nonprofit business, you have to support yourself and your employees and colleagues. They need to be able to have enough income for housing and for food and be able to survive in order to be able to carry out this laudable mission that you'd like to do. So, and of course, if what you're solving is a really big problem, and you can do it at sufficiently low cost where it has high value, then you can generate a lot of profits, and potentially you can create a business of really great value. And we call that the value question. The fourth question is how are you going to fit in and beat your competition? So the first part of that is, who is your competition? You have to identify your competition, and you have to figure out how it is you're going to position your business to be able to beat out your competitors. Again, when I talk to students at other places, sometimes I ask them if they have a really novel idea. I say, what's your competition? They tell me, oh, I don't have any competition. This is a totally new idea. Now, I should warn you that investors absolutely hate it when you say stuff like that. Because when you say, I don't have any competition, what they hear is either of two things. Either A, you don't know who your competition is, and that's a giant problem, or B, your problem is so insignificant that nobody actually cares about it. And so either one of those is a bad answer, right? So when you're thinking about who's your competition, you always have to think about the status quo as being part of your competition. So let's say that you were developing a new technology, a new device that was going to help people sleep better at night. And that's your idea. And that's a good idea. Some people have trouble sleeping at night. And you go out and you start thinking about, and of course, and out there may be no device like this out there. Maybe no device like this out there. This may be a unique thing in the space. The problem is already there's a bunch of people who are not sleeping well, and you know what they do as a solution to this problem? They toss and they turn, they read a book, they get up in the middle of the night, they go to the bathroom, they get back to bed. Whatever it is they do, that's the status quo, and you're going to have to figure out how to get them out of their rut, because they are kind of comfortable in their rut. It may not be a good place where they are, but it's what they know, it's what they do. And you're going to need to come up with a solution that actually gives them enough motivation to actually get out of their rut. Even though you have a much better solution, you need to figure out how you're going to position them to get themselves into this new product or service that you're offering. And that question is what we call competition. Now, with the answers to those four questions in hand, it's NAVC again. What you need is an appointment with a venture capitalist. No, that's not really the end. You probably know that, right? Because it's actually not that easy. And those four questions, which, while they're crucial, if you can't answer those four questions, you certainly are not going to have a viable business. If you can answer those questions, you might have a viable business. So this really doesn't actually get you to where you need to know, but it's a good sorting mechanism to kind of sort through at least some initial steps of what those initial questions are going to look like. Okay, and so for those who are sort of mathematically inclined, I call those necessary but not sufficient conditions, right, for developing a potential business. There's more steps to business development. But before we get there, I'm actually going to take a side route, and I'm going to take a step into deep water where I talk briefly about neuroscience. Now, I can tell you it's somewhat terrifying to talk about neuroscience in a room full of neuroscientists, especially when one is not a neuroscientist myself, and I have never played one on television either. But as I understand it, there's basically sort of two general breakdowns of neuroscience. One is this kind of molecular cellular neuroscience, and the second is cognitive behavioral neuroscience. And sort of molecular cellular neuroscience, what I understand, is that you're looking at things like single neuron studies, and you're using tools, genetic tools like CRISPR-Cas9 or other tools like that. Whereas for the cognitive and behavioral neuroscience, you're going to be using tools like fMRI, where you're going to be looking kind of at larger brain functions. You'll certainly be using clinical studies, which I guess the other course that you're going to be talking about. And then you'll be also doing experiments on how human decision making, and really looking at how people or animals behave. Now, the good news about neuroscience is that you are a field full, chock-a-block full of big problems. Now, you might not think big problems is necessarily good, but if you're looking to start a business, finding a roof space with lots of big problems is really good. And I somewhat arbitrarily divided the big problems into two buckets. One bucket was medical problems, and in the medical problem bucket, I kind of divided that into two sub-buckets. One is disease states, things like Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, and these are terrible diseases. Okay, these are unambiguously terrible diseases. They strike down people, and often in the prime of their life. They take people's lives really away from them. They take the things that people value, they make it very difficult or maybe impossible for them to do the things they want to do. And so these are things that are very damaging to society, valuable people get taken out of society. They're terribly damaging and to the people who actually have these disease states, and they would potentially pay a lot of money to not have these disease states. These are things which are potentially really big problems and really valuable if you can come up with solutions. I understand actually that Dr. Solomon here at Tel Aviv University already has a potential vaccine for Alzheimer's that's in human clinical trials. And that's just the kind of thing which is going to be potentially earth-shattering if and when it comes to fruition, and it's a treatment that people can actually get, so they would no longer potentially have Alzheimer's disease. The second medical set is actually event-based. And these are things which happen to people, and so strokes happen to people. And when strokes happen, they again often strike down relatively young people in the prime of their life, and they are, in addition to being life-threatening, they are very debilitating. And if we can find better ways to forestall strokes, to treat strokes after they happen, finding different ways to understand and reduce the effects of strokes, these things would be really valuable. Traumatic brain injury. The military spends huge amounts of money trying to deal with traumatic brain injury. It's a major, major area that they are making investments in. Concussion has been in the news a lot lately. People have been talking about concussions, particularly with respect to sporting events. And of course, CTE, even subconcussive events repeated, we think is causing brain damage. Recently in the news, actually, American soccer player Brandi Chastain just announced she was actually donating her brain to science so they could observe whether a soccer player who headed the ball a lot maybe has some evidence of CTE. And so these are things which are hugely important, affect lots and lots of people, and in really debilitating ways. Again, solving some of these problems would be something that would be hugely valuable. Okay, the second subset of problems is the category business problems. And business problems, again, I somewhat arbitrarily divided in two. One is problems of cognition. So cognition, we're really talking about sensation. How do we know things? How do we perceive the world? How do we all perceive sort of the world in sort of a similar way? And those problems are really challenging and really difficult. And again, it's interesting. There's already been a lot of work done, as you know. I think there's, in the single neuron studies and systems, the system of eyesight has actually been probably one that has been pretty well understood at this point. Well enough understood that I think another faculty member here at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Hanan, is actually working on kind of a version of a digital eye to help people who have blindness, right? So sensation, but issues of smell or hearing, things like that are actually much more difficult, or touch even actually. All these sensations are really difficult to understand. If we can understand them better and make them help people with those things, it would be big. And then learning. Learning is, again, how do we learn things? You know, young children, they absorb language. I don't know, if I have my own young children, they absorb language. It's a miracle how they absorb language. We really don't necessarily know that. It gets harder as you get older. But learning is something we spend a lot of money on as a society. As a world, we spend trillions of dollars a year on learning. Right? Learning is something we do with young children. You are all part of the learning enterprise here yourselves. You know, not only are you spending a lot of money on your own educations, the state is contributing a lot of money on your behalf for your education, and it doesn't end with school. You know, we're all lifelong learners now. So, you know, no matter how old you are, you're going to continue learning, and it's going to be a continued investment that you make. And it's going to be a lot of money. And if we can find better ways to improve learning, to make learning faster, easier, cheaper, better, have people retain memory better. Again, things that we don't really understand necessarily that well now. These are things which are huge problems, which are, I think, potentially very exciting. Social norms is a little tricky because, again, we take them for granted in many ways. But if you've lived in different parts of the world, you know different things aren't always the same way. And there's big issues. There's things like global climate change, where global climate change is a thing where we do it in one place, but it affects people in another place. And not only does it affect people in another place, that's a pretty hard problem to solve, it affects people all through other times as well. And we as people have a very hard time making these trade-offs between what cause and effect between now and things way in the future or very far distant locations. And so understanding how these social norms get set and finding ways to create social norms so we can all get on the same page and actually solve what are unarguably some very large problems would be really a big deal. By the way, it goes down to small stuff too. You know, if you're in London, you try to get on the bus, you queue up and everybody lines up very nicely and they kind of trot on the bus one right after the other. for those of you who get on the bus here in Tel Aviv, it doesn't work quite that way, and but that's okay. But but these issues of social norms are things we take for granted, but actually really important in terms of understanding and making life work smoothly, and that is something that would be valuable. The last area is maybe even the biggest, is decision making. Decision making is something, again, people are often uncomfortable making decisions. They don't like to make decisions. People wear the same clothes every day, or take the same route, or eat the same breakfast, or all those kinds of things. But in fact, there's a huge industry, again, trillions of dollars per year spent on trying to induce people to make decisions. And sometimes the government's trying to have you make good decisions in various ways. Marketing, new product development are all about getting you to you to buy their product as opposed to somebody else's product. Why Coke versus Pepsi? And then there's whole issues of business strategy, which is to say, how are you going to make your business effective? And of course, a lot of this comes down to decision making. And if we can understand decision making better, that is the thing that would be hugely valuable, and you could have multi-billion-dollar businesses around these areas that would be, if you have promising developments. Okay, so shift my notes here. So now neuroscience is fundamentally interdisciplinary, and you all know that. I think that actually the Segal School is really in the cutting edge of kind of really bringing together a very diverse group of scientists and students, and it's really now neuro plus everything, right? I mean, basically, you're combining existing fields with fields of knowledge with new technology to come up with new discoveries, new ideas, and developing your own new technology, things that are going to be important to the world, things that are going to really make a difference in the way potentially a lot of people live their lives. You're going to potentially be in the place where you can actually make something that's going to be really changing the world as we know it. So there's neuropsychology and neuroendocrinology, neuroimmunology, neuroeducation, neuroethics, neuroeconomics, neurolaw. Actually, we could make up a few new centers and journals right here now. I'm proposing a new center for neuromusic and poetry, or a new journal in neuroanthropology, right? It's really easy to do, and it's kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke, because in fact, actually, we as people are right at the root of all of these things, and how we work and how we integrate with these fields makes a big difference, and it really all comes down to a large part how our brains work. So, it's really an exciting time to be in neuroscience. Now, once you have all those new discoveries and new ideas and new technologies that you've developed, and you've landed upon what you think is as a candidate for your $1 million idea, the question is, what do you do with it, right? And that's really a problem of integration and translation, right? That's really it's really a problem of integration and translation, and it's really just trying to integrate the research that you're doing here with the business that is kind of out there someplace beyond the gates of Tel Aviv University. And so the question is, the integration of those two things is really the challenge before us. And it's really a process. It's really kind of a translation process. We're going to translate new research into innovations, that is, things that can be potentially commercialized, and then really try to get those embedded into businesses where you can then achieve these great events, the great effects that we're talking about. Now, for those of you who are quick studies, we've been doing this for a very, very long time, this integration of new ideas into potential businesses. One could argue we've been doing this since humans existed, but certainly for at least centuries. I mean, when the Greeks basically did research on human anatomy, that created this whole category of business, which we call physicians and doctors, right? And so, so basically, whenever we have these new technologies, we can actually create whole new businesses and whole new business lines out of that as a result. Well, for most of the last 100 years, we've been doing this in a way which many of us call the old way. And the old way was you came up with a new research finding in the lab, a new technology, a new understanding of how things work, a new process, some new basic understanding, some new basic technology. And what you do is you take that and then you go out and you try to figure out if there's a market. And you try to figure out if there's a market, you do your market research. You basically talk to a bunch of people and try to figure out if there's, try to understand sort of who your potential customers might be. These days, you don't even actually need to do your own market research, right? You can actually go to one of these market research firms, and if you're talking about like sleep aids, for example, that we talked about at the beginning, you can actually just go get them to send you their report on like sleep aids, and they're going to point out that as people get older, people have more and more trouble sleeping at night, and so therefore that market is going to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 8% a year for the next 15 years. And you can say, whoa, that's really exciting. That means it's going to be about 4 times as large in about 15 years. That's a really large growing market. That would be a great potential market for me to go into. And then you need to identify the strategy you're going to follow. Are you going to sell them a device? Is it an app? Is it something is it one of these new wristbands? What are you going to sell them? What's your monetization strategy? How are you going to go to market with your new technology and this new idea you have? And then once you have all that, you sit down and you carefully write out your business plan. And that might be a 40-page, 80-page, 120-page business plan that you put down that lays out in excruciating detail exactly how you're going to build this business over time and all the steps you're going to take and who all the team members are and exactly what the process you're going to follow are and what software and what hardware you're going to develop, what resources you're going to gather, who you're going to gather them from, who you're going to strategically partner with, how you're going to get to market. You can lay that all out in this business plan, and then you go out there and you execute your business plan. Execute your business plan and you're showing yourself, of course, your business plan because you're working on a big problem. It's going to be a successful business. This is going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. And so, of course, you execute and you turn it right away into a multi-billion-dollar business. Well, we all know that many startups fail, right? We know that many startups fail. In fact, actually, most startups fail. Actually, fewer than you might think fail, by the way. It turns out that almost 50% of businesses survive 5 years. Although they continue to sort of die off after that. And people argue that this is a failure of execution. You just didn't execute your plan. I mean, your plan was clear. Your plan showed your business was going to go like this. Whoop, it's going to go do really, really well. And you just didn't execute your plan. But of course, that sort of begs the question, because was it really your execution that was at fault, or was there maybe a flaw in the plan? And of course, very often, what we see is that the plan basically just didn't really kind of match up to all the things that the real world actually had in it. And so as soon as you start to go out there into the real world, you discover things are different, and your plan, you have to adjust your plan. And of course, this is what people have done for eons. People have taken their plan, they've kind of adjusted and adapted their plan, and they recognize that in order to make a successful business, I keep after adapting it to what is the realities of the marketplace. Okay, so what's the new way? So the new way is this idea called the lean startup. The lean startup, that's a hot new language these days in the world of startups. It was popularized by this guy, Steve Blank. It's not a totally original idea to Steve Blank, but basically, but he really kind of brought it together and gave it a name. And he's a professor out at Stanford. One of his students, Eric Ries, actually wrote the book, literally the book, The Lean Startup. And The Lean Startup basically is actually a book that I'd recommend you read. You should all read The Lean Startup. Actually, it's a really easy book to read. It's very kind of conversational. It's a very quick read. It's cheap to buy. It's not like a textbook. Basically, it's just, and it gives you the flavor of the lean startup. And what they say is that what a startup does is search for a business model. And in particular, what a startup does is search for a scalable and repeatable business model. Now, if you're making a device that's going to help people sleep better, and I have to do a whole lot of engineering, I make it for one person, and that person, it solves their problem, but then if I want to work with somebody else, I have to go back to the lab and start from scratch again. That's really not a very repeatable business model. What you're looking for is something I can make it for one person, and then when I made it for one person, I can sell it to all those other people, maybe 100, maybe a million, or even 1 billion people out there who all need to figure out how to sleep better. Suddenly, they all need the same device, and so you can that's really a repeatable, scalable business model. And in order to make that model work, you're going to basically run it through a process. And so the process is you're going to come up with your hypothesis. How do I think this business is supposed to work? I have some specific ideas, and so how I think this business is supposed to work. Then what I do is I build some tests that allow me to test those hypotheses. In the language of lean startup, they sometimes call it a minimum viable product. Could be a prototype, could be a beta, could be a proof of concept, could be a website, could be any number of different things that you're going to use to test some of these hypotheses that you develop. And then you're going to measure, see what happens with your test. And you're going to learn from that. So with our sleep aid device,
I went out to the world and I basically said, okay, I went out to 100 different people and I said, okay, is this sleep aid device something you think would be useful to you? And of the 100 people I went out to, 70 of them said yes, and 30 of them said no. Okay, well that's not bad. I don't really need to sell to everybody. Is there anything I can find in common about those 70? And you notice that the 70 people were all 30 years old and older. And the 30 people who didn't like the idea, they were all 30 years old and younger. Well, that probably means, now you can learn something. You say, okay, I thought that everybody in the world would want to buy my sleep aid, but actually now what I've discovered is that only people who are probably above the age of 30 are really going to want to buy this device. And so I can now target my market more narrowly, and I can be more efficient in the way I potentially run or start my business. It's maybe a smaller market, but it's going to be a lot cheaper for you to try to figure out who your customers are. Now, once you've done that, you can update your hypotheses, and you get to iterate for another round. And now the good news is you get to do this a lot. And the faster you do this, the faster you learn. And the faster you learn, the faster you achieve a sustainable, scalable business model. And you get to a place where you can actually run a business that's going to generally be profitable and be self-sustaining. In fact, in many ways, you're never going to stop doing this process. Even when you have a successful business needs to keep developing itself and needs to keep enhancing itself and needs to keep coming up with new products and new services and new things to offer to their clients in order to continue to grow and to continue to thrive. And so in fact, in many ways, this is actually something businesses just do forever and ever and ever. And so once you kind of get on this track, you basically keep developing new hypotheses and testing them and developing and moving them forward. Now, so that NAVC, remember that NAVC we started with? Well, that's really just a simple format for laying out 4 of your critically important hypotheses, right? That's just a simple way to lay out 4 of your critically important hypotheses. And we can call that a 4-box business model canvas, right? So again, a simple way to lay out 4 of the critical hypotheses that you then get to test and evaluate. If they all pass muster, that they're successful in the marketplace, then you might potentially have a viable business. Now, for those of you who heard the words business model canvas before, you were not thinking about NAVC. You were probably thinking about this, which is the business model canvas by Alex Osterwalder. And this is actually a 9-box canvas. And Osterwalder's 9-box canvas is one that he developed himself. He's done a lot of co-promotion of it with Steve Blank and some other people. So it's really so, and he's got 2 very good books out there. Again, these are 2 books that I would recommend you potentially read by Alex Osterwalder. One is actually his first book, which is called Business Model Generation, of how do you put together a business model. And then the second one, which is actually kind of a prequel, if you will, is actually Value Proposition Design. And these 2 books are, again, not expensive. They're very graphic. They're easy to read. But they're going to give you a flavor of how do you start sorting through and building your own business model canvas for your own idea as you develop it. Now, I'm not going to teach you about the business model canvas. It's actually like a whole nother course, and it's going to be more time than we have. Potentially, maybe another speaker in the future is going to talk about the business model canvas. That would be great. But at this point, I'm going to actually focus you briefly on 2 of the boxes. There's the box in the middle, let's see if I can get over there, there we go, which is called value propositions. And there's the box on the right, which is called customer segments. And the idea here is that for customer segments, these are your potential customers. These are the people you've identified as potential customers for your product or service that you think is going to be a great idea for them. And what you need to know about your customers is you need to know what are their gains. What's the potential? What's the upside for them? What could they do better? What would make them feel happier? You have a new web app that's going to help them lose weight, or you have a new web app that's going to do some other thing that would be a great gain for people that would make them feel better about themselves, and those are great gains. And then there's the pains, right? You can look at the disease states we talked about. Those are terrible pains, but you could talk about lesser things. You could talk about having trouble to sleep at night. These are pains, and people actually have these pains, and you can figure those out. And then the third is you want to figure out what are your customers' jobs. Now, when I say jobs, I'm not referring to strictly what they do to get a paycheck week to week. I'm talking really about what it is they want to do. And so jobs includes potentially what they do for a paycheck, but would include also that they want to be maybe a better father or a better husband or a more active member in the community or maybe just a better soccer player. And so all those things are kind of what they perceive as their jobs. And if you can help them with their jobs, then they're going to value what you're doing and potentially pay you for it and then reward your business. So what you need to offer them is what these things called value propositions. So you need to offer them these game creators. How do you help them lose weight or sleep better at night or alleviate some of their disease issues? And then what product or service you're going to give them that's going to make it easier for them to do their jobs, easier, quicker, better for them to do their jobs. And what you need to do is you need to make these things dovetail, right? You need to make these things dovetail so they work together pretty closely. If what you're trying to develop, for instance, is say a new iPod, a famous device, of course, from Apple. If you're trying to develop a new iPod, now iPod was kind of a great way for people to carry around portable music and listen to music kind of on the go, right? That was a very important new device a long time ago for helping people do that. Now you all use our phones, so I'm probably very dated myself here already. But if what the customer's problem is that they can't see very well, well, then an iPod is just not going to match up with eyesight problems, right? That's just going to be a miss. And so you can see right away that you need to get these things to work and you need to kind of match up the problem with the solution. And that is sometimes a challenge for scientists, I should warn you. Okay, so this process of matching these things up is known as fit in general. In the popular literature, it's called product market fit. Although actually there's really 3 different kind of stages of fit as I think about it. The first is, have you created a set of hypotheses that are just logically consistent? Have you created an iPod that is going to deal with people's problem of how do you listen to music on the go? Or have you developed eyeglasses or a new digital eyesight for people who have bad eyesight or even blindness, right? So have you matched up the problems and the solutions? Have you got a kind of a level of logical consistency between these things? Once you've got a level of logical consistency, you then kind of go out into the world. You go out into the marketplace and you try to figure out whether or not people agree with you. You have these hypotheses. You think certain customers that you've identified are going to want this thing, and you think that this is what they're going to want. You go out and see if there is actually a fit between this product and this market. And so this first solution, which is kind of an on-the-paper solution, when you go out in the world, now you're trying to find an in-the-market solution. Can you actually get people to buy and pay for this device or service that you're offering? If you can get people to pay for what it is you're offering, then you have an in-the-market fit. And that's very exciting. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a successful business, because oftentimes people find that customers want to buy what I'm selling, but it costs me too much to make. And so I can't really make any profit. And if I can't make any profit, then I can't generate any resources to support myself or my team in this business. So we see a lot of small businesses, by the way, that develop something that is what people want, but it's so expensive to make and to distribute and to support, that in fact the companies actually die. They can't actually maintain themselves. And that comes down to this third one, where we now need to integrate our product market fit with that rest of that business model canvas, the other 7 boxes of Osterwalder's. And those generally break down into organizational strategic elements. Is it going to be a small business? Is it going to be a large business? Is it going to be a wholesale business? Is it going to be a retail business? Is it going to be a domestic business? Is it going to be international business? Right? A lot of these different kinds of questions, organizational questions. And then there's financial questions, right? How am I going to finance it? Am I going to bootstrap this business for myself? Am I going to find investors? Am I going to get loans from the government or grants? How am I going to generate the resource, collect the resources for this business? If you can actually figure out how to solve all those problems, then you can achieve what's known as a business model fit. And if you can achieve a business model fit, that is more or less literally money in the bank. And so that's really kind of ultimately what you're going to be aiming for. Now, in order to achieve a fit, you need to figure out who those customers are. And I've mentioned briefly customers and customer segment. And when I'm talking to, particularly at a group of people working in medical technology, I talk to them about sort of who their customers are. They'll tell me, oh, my customers are hospitals, insurance companies, government agencies. And sometimes they even mention patients and doctors. But the problem is that hospitals, insurance companies, government agencies are not actually people, right? And so you need to figure out, when you're looking for customers, you're looking for actual people. Okay, that's like people you would like talk to and speak to, and you can even poke them and stuff. And and the problem is that you need to figure out who at the hospital, who at the insurance company, or who at the government agency is potentially actually your customer. You're looking for people that have hearts, brains, and hopefully even budgets so that they can potentially pay and buy this thing that you're like offering to them, right? And so it's not enough for a bunch of scientists to go out and like tell their idea to a bunch of other scientists, because they'll all kind of agree, that seems like a great idea. But, you know, I mean, that's not really going to get you where you need to go. You need to find these other people, these strangers. Now, you can think in terms of archetypes, right? So if I was developing a new device that would eliminate the effects of CTE, for example. We talked about that, you know, subconcussive chronic brain injury. You might come up with this new device, and you could literally decide that what I want to target is like soccer moms. Now, that's kind of like a joke in political circles, but you could literally find soccer moms. You could literally go out on a Friday to like the field where the kids are playing soccer, and off on the sideline, there's where all the moms are, and you could basically like talk to the moms. You could identify the moms, you could talk to the moms, you could like get their information, you could find out, would they be interested in a device that's going to potentially detect whether little Susie or little Johnny is basically, you know, is going to potentially get CTE from heading the ball too much when they're 8 or 10 years old. And so these things are potentially valuable, potentially important, and so archetypes is kind of a good shortcut for thinking about customers, but it's still got to get down to like regular people. I mentioned before patients and doctors. The problem is even patients and doctors, you know, aren't really enough because, of course, everybody in the world is at one time or another going to be a patient, and everybody in the world is probably too broad an audience to be targeting as your potential customer base. You need to figure out how to narrow that down and who your customers really are. Now, there are lots of different models. There's lots of different models for going to market. The most common model we think of is kind of that one-to-one model. So Apple comes up with this idea for an iPod. They manufacture an iPod. They distribute an iPod. They sell people iPods. People buy iPods. The people who buy the iPods, they use the iPod. They listen to the iPod, and they have a little on the train or the bus or walking along. And what you have is a seller and a buyer, and they have a relationship with each other, and that's kind of the iPod market. But a lot of markets don't work that way. So I mean, let's talk about Google for a moment. Who here has ever used Google for search? Okay, that ought to be everybody. Who here has paid Google actual money to use Google for search? That ought to be nobody, okay? Because Google search is free, right? And we all know it's free, right? And a lot of things on the internet are free. But of course, free doesn't really make for a sustainable business model, right? Because we know they have to be getting the resources to kind of keep the team together, keep providing this product and service that we all value, this Google search. And we all know who that is, right? That's advertisers, right? And advertisers are participating in this Google search process. What they're doing is they're paying for ads because what they want, they don't want the search. What they want is our eyeballs, right? And so they're basically trying to gain access to us. And so what you have is that's known as a two-sided market, right? And so you have people who use the product and people who pay for the product, and they're two totally different people. Now, it would not work if you had just one group. If you had just one group, the whole business falls apart. Either one just falls apart, right? You need them both there at the same time. And so this is really kind of a more complicated two-sided market. So this is the bad news. In the medical space, it's very complicated, right? We have like two-sided, we have n-sided, where n is like a very large number. And so this n-sided market includes, is what I generically call a customer ecosystem, right? You have this whole panoply of customers out there who are participants in this medical decision-making process. So you obviously have patients, but you also have doctors and payers, and payers who may be insurance companies or government agencies. You have also regulators. But then you also have lots of other people. You have legislators who are making laws about medical devices and drugs. And then you also have like family members who are like involved in the decision making for their other family members for their medical devices and drugs and their treatment and whatnot. And so what you have is it gets larger and larger. This ecosystem is really, really large and complicated. And here's the bad news. When you've identified all those different customer segments, remember all those customer segments? You need to match up value propositions with every single one of them. Because if you do not match up value propositions with all of those customer segments, then in fact somebody is going to sabotage your business. And so Aunt Tilly is going to say, "Oh no, I heard somebody who tried that once and it didn't work for them." And so and suddenly you're not going to get the treatment that you actually really need. And so you need to match up all those different customer segments, and it's really, really a complicated and difficult problem, especially in the medical space. Valuable, but complicated and difficult. So what you really need to do then is get out of the building. And this picture right here is actually Steve Blank. This is Steve Blank right here, and Steve says there are no facts inside the building. You need to get out of the building. He actually abbreviates this. He calls this GOOTB, G-O-O-T-B. That's just get out of the building. But if you hear GOOTB, you'll know what that is, that crazy word. And Steve Blank, basically, the idea is you need to go out there and test your hypotheses. You need to get out of your comfort zone. You can't be talking to other scientists. You need to be talking to strangers, people who might be buying your product or service. And you need to speak to actual potential customers. Now, I work with scientists all the time. And my scientists, they love working in their lab. In fact, they work really hard in their lab, right? They get up early in the morning and they go into lab. And they're in the lab all day. And they stay there until very late at night. And they sometimes come back late at night in order to help with their cell cultures or something or other. And so they're in the lab a lot. So it's not that they're not working really hard. And what they really want to do is they really want to perfect their technology, perfect their experiment, perfect their science. They want to make things more efficient. They want to improve things. They want to make them a little better. They want a better signal. And that's laudable, but the problem is they want to stay in the lab. And that is potentially both very risky and potentially very expensive. There is actually nothing sadder than a scientist who spent 20 years, 30 years in the lab, and they emerge from the lab with this thing that they are very proud of, the perfect thing that they're very proud of, and they show it to the world, and the world says, and it doesn't really care. And the problem is they have now committed their own time for 30 years, government and other people's resources for a very long time, and nobody really cares about this thing. When they show it to potential customers, say, no, I didn't really want that. I'd rather have something like this. And they smack their head and they say, I could have made that if I'd known. If I'd only known, I could have easily put that together, but I didn't know. And so what you need to do as scientists, you need to really get out of the building much earlier than you think you do. And you need to start testing your idea with potential customers before you're ready. And because the customers will give you guidance in terms of how to do your science. I know that's going to sound crazy, but people who know nothing about your science are going to give you valuable information about what you should be doing in the lab, because they're going to tell you what matters to them in the world. And of course, ultimately, what you want to do is make an impact on the world. And so therefore, having this dialogue before you're ready is something that's going to be really, really potentially valuable to you. Okay, so this exercise is generically known as customer discovery. And customer discovery is a contact sport. Right? This is not a thing where you can send out a survey monkey and just kind of see what comes back. Right? This is a face-to-face, hand-to-hand kind of like combat. This is where you're going to go out to potential customers and you are going to sit down over a cup of coffee and try to understand what's really going on and what they really want and how they really want it. And it's got to be face-to-face engagement. I say this face-to-face thing a lot of times, and people say, oh, I can just call them, right? No, that's not face-to-face. I can Skype. No, it's still not face-to-face. Face-to-face is going to be better communication. In fact, for those of you in neuroscience, you know that we communicate vastly beyond just the language we use. Gestures, language, all these other forms of communication are really important. Face-to-face, we get a lot more communication done, especially hard communication done, than we do just via words. And so it's better communication, and so therefore it's going to be better learning. And if it's better learning and it's more thorough learning and faster learning, that's going to be something that's going to help your small business, because you are going to, if you learn faster, you're going to achieve this business model faster, and that's going to be something that's ultimately of value to you. Now, it's a huge opportunity for you to learn unexpected information, which means you cannot use a survey. Scientists love surveys. You cannot use a survey, okay? So scientists especially. But you cannot use a survey, because a survey presupposes you kind of know what the answer is. Now, a survey works fine if you're going to say, who are you going to vote for? Trump or Clinton? And of course, you sort of know the answers. There's only a couple of answers there, and you're going to pick one of them, right? So you can kind of get a sense of the crowd that way. But if they're all going to vote for, somebody else, or going to come up with some other answer, if you didn't have that opportunity on the survey, you're never going to learn that important new thing, the thing that's that unexpected thing. And so really listening to your customers and trying to listen for the unexpected things is really going to be one of the things that's going to be hugely valuable for you. And what you're going to do then is you're going to take those major important hypotheses that you developed, and you're going to try to validate them. can I validate those gains, pains, and jobs from my customer? And if I can't validate them, or if my customer tells me, yes, that's an issue, but it's not a very important issue for me, well, not very important. If it's not one of their most important issues, then it's not going to be hugely valuable to them. It's not going to be something they're going to want to spend their resources to solve. And if you can't validate it, you have to revise your hypotheses. And that can be unpleasant a little bit, but the answer is, but it's going to be part of your growth process. And similarly, you need to validate your value propositions or revise them, right? And so either way, it's going to be a success if you can move the ball forward. So this process of talking to humans, there's actually another book out that I'm going to recommend to you. This one happens to be the world's skinniest book. It's about literally this thick, by Giff Constable and Frank Romolovsky. But it talks about how do you do this customer discovery thing, because scientists, I know you're all smart, but many of you do not actually know how to talk to people. And so like a little guidebook on how to talk to people, don't be embarrassed. It's actually something I'm going to recommend to all of you. And so just go ahead and figure out how to talk to people, because you talk to other scientists and use this language in the shorthand, but not everybody is a scientist. And so figuring out how to both talk to them and get information from them is really important. And so what they talk about is act like a detective. Right? Detective has different hypotheses about who might be the perpetrator of the crime, and what they do is they then collect clues to try to figure out, is it one or the other, and trying to figure out who might actually be the perpetrator of the crime. And so so you're going to try to collect clues. You're not going to go out there trying to sell stuff. You're going to try to figure out how collect clues as you go along. And they recommend kind of a three-step approach. The first step is act like a customer yourself. Go try to do what customers do. So again, if what you're looking for is a sleep aid, go figure out what people do for sleep aid. Maybe what they use is Ambien or no-dose, or not no-dose, dose, I guess, whatever, anyhow, but Ambien, or some other drug treatment, for instance, that they might use, or you might try what's on the market, and see what's out there already and see if it actually works or not. And then you can observe actual customers, right? Observe actual customers who consume some of these different competing products or services. And then eventually what you can do is you can actually go talk to them, and you can actually have them tell you their actual stories. And stories is really important, by the way, because stories is actually just how we humans communicate a lot of really valuable information. And so if you can get them to tell your story, don't it's like the 80-20 rule. You want to ask them a question, but then have them tell you a long story. Then you're on the right track. You're going to collect data. You're going to actually measure what you're collecting, and then you're going to evaluate that versus your expectations. And from that, you're going to learn, and then you're going to identify some of your early adopters. And so when I went out there, for example, or mythically, when I went out there trying to find out about my sleep aid, right, what I did was I basically found a lot of people. But what I found is menopausal women were very excited about this idea of a product was going to help them sleep better. And so they might be my early adopters. They might be the ones who are most excited. That's really top thing for them, that they want to be able to solve this problem. And so therefore, if I can help them solve this problem, then in fact, they would be my earliest customers and they would pay me the most. Okay, so kind of my charge to you is go on out there and change the world. Right? Go on out there and change the world. You are in a perfect position to put together the tools to be able to make the world a better place, do something different, create something new, and add value to the world. If you can add value to the world, you yourself will be very valuable. You will, that could be as an academic. You'll get academic accolades and prominent positions, but also you can, as a business person, basically, you can create a business that is going to be of great value. And I should warn you that when you're out there changing the world, not everybody's going to like it, right? And this is a problem. But when you disturb the status quo, there are going to be winners and losers. You would like to be one of the winners as opposed to one of the losers, but the answer is there are going to be losers, and so that's just a reality. If you want to move forward, you're going to have to, if you're going to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. There's lots of sayings like this. Schumpeter talked about creative destruction, and so if you want to create, you must also destroy in some cases. Take risks. Go ahead and take some chances. Now, I say here take deliberate risks. That is just not go out there and skydive without a parachute or something or other, right? This is take deliberate risks. Be thoughtful about it. Come up with a plan. Think about what you think is going to happen, and then go ahead and take some chances to see if it really does happen. Don't worry about whether you have all the resources already. You don't. Just get over it. You don't have all the resources you need to create a giant multi-billion-dollar business. But if you have a really good idea, you will be able to gather the resources you need. You will be able to recombine society's resources without regard to current ownership or control. So then there's 4 steps you need to follow here. You need to perceive an opportunity, figure out what you think that $1 million idea is, devise a strategy for gaining control of the needed resources, come up with your marketing and your plan and your customer discovery and your business model. And then you need to implement that plan. You need to execute that plan to bring about the change that you hope to bring about. And ultimately, you get to harvest the rewards of your innovation and something that's going to be a benefit to the world. All right. You've all been really quiet. Now it's time for questions if you have any. Oh, that's like a dead silence. Okay.
If you fail, can you blame the market for changing while you were preparing for the old market?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. You can blame anybody you want. There's actually so my first career was on Wall Street. I was a trader on Wall Street, and the rule of thumb on Wall Street is that if you make a lot of money because the thing you bought goes up, you're a genius. If you lose money because the thing you bought went down, you just had bad luck, right? So definitely that's a good human trait to do. But the key is to learn from those failures, right? The key is it's not so bad to fail. The key is to learn from those failures so that you're able to then incorporate that learning into sort of the next thing you do.
When you look at the medical field, you can't actually put yourself in your customer's shoes. You can't.
That's true.
It's very hard for them. You can't really understand them, their needs. They want to live, they want to improve their life, but you can't really put yourself in their shoes. So how would you approach it?
Yeah, so the medical space, as I've mentioned a couple times, is actually a really complicated one. You're right, that the strategy of act like a customer, if what you develop is a new tool for open brain surgery, it's probably a mistake to do it on yourself first, right? I mean, so you can certainly see how that you have to use kind of a little common sense with that. But the basic principle is still the same. So, as humans, we're well equipped with empathy. And trying to understand and have them tell you things that you can then potentially understand is really what is what's going to help you. And so we're well positioned to really understand kind of other human beings. Actually, when I see people who are sad walking along the street in Tel Aviv, you know that they're sad, right? I don't know why they're sad, but it's easy enough to tell, or angry, or whatever. And so we actually really can get quite a lot of information just out of the way that people are walking down the sidewalk. And so if you spend 20 or 30 minutes over a cup of coffee with somebody, you can really gain a lot more information about them. So you're right. You're not going to know what it is to have ALS unless you actually have ALS, and God forbid. So but you can certainly understand what people are feeling about, and they can tell you those things, and you can understand them in a pretty sophisticated way. So again, the trick is spending face-to-face time with people and quality time, and where they have a chance to talk to you. I mean, actually, getting people away from their office for a cup of coffee is a great strategy. I mean, when you want to meet customers, oftentimes I buy them a cup of coffee at the local Starbucks because they know they're not going to have to be with me for more than about 20 or 30 minutes. The amount of time it takes to consume a cup of coffee, if it's an unpleasant conversation, they can kind of escape pretty quickly. It's kind of neutral ground, right? So I haven't trapped them in their office or anything, and I've gotten them out of their office, so they're not being disturbed by their assistant or their computer email or whatever. So it's really kind of a little bit of a win-win. So so try to getting people out of their space. Oftentimes I meet people at like trade shows and things, right? Because if you try to meet people in their labs or in their workplaces, they're busy. But when they're at a trade show, they're kind of there to see and learn something new, and they're prepared. They're a little more open. So there's strategies you can follow to kind of get more elusive and more information. Another question.
What do you think the university should or can do to accelerate more interpretation from the student and scientists, and we develop more from the good that we have in the university?
Yeah. So that's a really hard problem, and I actually personally spend a huge amount of my time on that exact problem. Okay, so I spend a lot of time building out elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, both at my home institution and throughout New Jersey, and actually throughout the United States. So we have an incubator on campus. We have about 90 high technology and life science companies that are in incubation. So that's a place where people can work with little companies, and faculty can, and they can also spin out potentially for little companies. A lot of them are spin-ins, interestingly. But we also have an accelerator program where we can kind of give people kind of a crash course over 10 weeks in terms of how to start their business. Programs like this one really are at the heart of it too, because just opening people's minds and even reading those 3 or 4 really low-tech, simple books that I mentioned is going to potentially give you a flavor and a pretty good understanding of what some of these elements are. It's not going to make you an expert right away, but it's going to give you enough that you then are in a position to learn some more, right? And so getting started is part of it, getting people out of their comfort zone. Again, these events are really good ones. The Kohler Institute of Venture here at Tel Aviv University is another one that brings different people together from different places trying to look at new ventures. The government has a big role in this. The Office of the Chief Scientist here in Israel has been hugely supportive of many ventures. The European Union is funding this. The United States, the National Science Foundation has been a big supporter of this. The National Science Foundation of the United States created a program called Innovation Core, which actually matches up teams which have an academic lead, somebody who has some real deep expertise, along with a graduate student who basically is developing that expertise, but hasn't really found an academic job and hasn't quite figured out what their next thing is, and maybe they'll start a new business, be an entrepreneur, along with an entrepreneurial mentor, somebody who's a seasoned entrepreneur. And so those teams of three then kind of are able to work on this, developing these business models and learning some of these lean startup principles. And that's been a pretty successful model as well. So there's not one answer. I mean, at NJIT, I helped found the NJIT Highlander Angel Network. That's a group of alumni and interested people that are contributing money to startup companies. Again, some early seed money for startup companies. They're all parts of the ecosystem. And unfortunately, you need all those different parts because it's hard. It's not an easy process. And trying to figure out sort of, and not to be rude, it's rare that tenured full professors who have achieved some new discovery decide to chuck it all and take a flyer on starting a new business, right? It doesn't happen all that often. More often, it's actually one of their students who actually goes off and commercializes some new opportunity, right? So trying to figure out how to do the knowledge transfer is a big deal as well. So there's a lot of parts of that question about what's the university going to do? I'd say this interdisciplinary thing that you're doing right here is really at the heart of it. Just getting people out of their ivory towers, and learning a course like this one, and again, these are all crucial first pieces. I actually have a program where I give out mini grants. I give out grants of like $2,000 or $3,000, which is not a lot of money, but I give out mini grants, but to let people kind of develop their technology a little bit and look at commercialization. The hook is they have to do a little online course where they actually learn something about these things. And so I force them to do a little online course and force them to do a little bit of customer discovery and business modeling as part of the price of getting their little mini grant. It's kind of like a bribe to get them to learn something that they really should learn anyhow, but they resist, and so therefore I give them a little bribe to learn it, and I get that money from the National Science Foundation. So that's another program. So there's a zillion things that I'm trying to do actually exactly to address this issue, and it's a hard one. It's a hard one.
Another direction, so when you have something in your lab and you want to bring it to the industry, you're not going to be the one who is going to talk to the people. Otherwise, you won't work and develop it. So what should be the mechanism to bring it?
So oddly, I'm going to tell you that even the scientists should do some of the actual talking to actual customers because they need to learn the process. But ultimately, you're right. It's mostly going to be one of the graduate students in the lab who actually does the heavy lifting. And so of the first 100 interviews you do, that faculty member might actually be part of 30 of them. And the entrepreneurial mentor will be maybe part of 30 of them, but then the graduate student is going to do, is going to be part of all 100 of them. And then there are part of 80 of them. And they're going to then proceed with that down the road and continue to go through that process of building, measuring, learning. So ultimately, in general, we don't think it's the tenured faculty member who's spent a lot of time and effort building up to get in a place where they have a tenured faculty position to suddenly chuck it all so they can see if this new business is going to start. But there's no one more credible than the faculty member for some of those early discussions because they really have the deep knowledge of what it is the technology can do. So when a customer says something unexpected, they can respond to it the best to understand sort of how to sort of make a small change that's going to really address what the customer wants. All right. Thank you.